Day 1034 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 776,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,990 in the past day, where the total count will reach on or just shy of 780 losses by Christmas, and on or just shy of 800k losses by the new year. Then as for hardware losses, 6 tanks, 15 APVs, and 29 artillery. No air defense systems destroyed in the past day, but it does somehow remind me of a recent statement from the Russian Ministry of Defense claiming that at least 30 Patriot air defense batteries have been destroyed in Ukraine since 2022. And yet, this raises eyebrows for several reasons, especially considering that Russia has struggled to gain air superiority over Ukraine, a country with a relatively small air force. But further than that, it is odd that they specified 2022, as Ukraine didn't receive Patriot air defense systems until April of 23. Then of course, most notably here, Ukraine has never had anywhere near 30 Patriot batteries. Instead, Ukraine only operates around 12 so far. So these Russian MOD claims are really always something else. Then across to the map and to Tatarstan in Russia, as Ukrainian intelligence reported a significant fire at a warehouse some 1,100 kilometers away from the front lines, and for a warehouse fire which destroyed components for Iranian-designed Shahed 136 drones valued at $16 million. The blaze reportedly consumed 65 drone fuselages, along with engines, navigation systems, and thermal imaging cameras, all intended for the assembly of 400 drones, and no doubt a site where future orders were expected. Now, while local authorities confirmed drone strikes earlier on December 21 that damaged several buildings, those incidents occurred in Kazan instead, where they reported no separate incidents at the Alabuga warehouse most recently. Now, information is very limited on this most recent attack, but nonetheless, it appears to be the AFU targeting Russian military assets within their own country. Then to Rostov, where right after my upload from yesterday, we caught wind of the destruction of an ammunition warehouse in Novosibirsk, which experienced quite a significant detonation, and as reported by various Russian media outlets. Local authorities have yet to provide detailed assessments of the aftermath, though it's best we wait for follow-up satellite imagery, which is a much more reliable source of information than that of the Russian government officials' assertions. Then to Russia's Belgorod region, where there was yet another instance of a previous event occurring, as in this case, due to dense fog, a driver was unable to react in time to the concrete pyramids, commonly known as dragon's teeth, that were placed there by Russian forces as a means of indicating a checkpoint passageway, but in doing so, not providing any sufficient any warnings at all of their placement. After all this time, it's hard to believe that this is still happening. There's no reason or rhyme here, there's no consideration for vehicles traveling on highways, instead just a chaotic reactionary approach, which describes a lot of how the Russian military operates. Then headed up north, still in Russia, so looking into the Vladimir region, just bordering Moscow, we see more of Russia on fire once again, where a school teacher was reported to have thrown a Molotov cocktail into a local police station. Bizarre events like these are increasing in nature, where it appears that the strongholds of Putin supporters are suddenly going on a rampage. Whether it be pensioners or grannies dousing police cars, setting them alight, or grandpas burning post offices. Not to mention a fair share of military enlistment officers as well, copping the brunt of what appears to be this increasingly agitated society. Then headed to Kursk, where warriors from the Code 9.2 unit of the Ukrainian forces have stopped an assault of a battalion of North Korean troops. This video shows a small part of their work, But most impressively is something we rarely have seen before, a heads-up display on the drone operator console indicating the 4 separate munitions dropped from the single drone. Now, these multi-drop drones are nothing new for Ukraine, but the graphical interface we see here displaying the 4 munitions as they expend their loads just adds an engaging new layer to seeing these types of actions unfold. And in this case, scene dropped in the sequence of 1, 2, 4, 3, likely due to the drone being equipped with different payloads for different mission profiles. Then also in Kursk, where Ukrainian Special Operations Forces, or the SOF, have revealed new insights into Russia's attempts to obscure the involvement of North Korean soldiers in the conflict. They uncovered fake documents issued by Russia, disguising the true identities of North Korean troops, such as Ban Guk Jin and Lee Dae-hyuk, put under fabricated names like Kim Kang Solat Albertovich. So this absolutely clever ruse includes military tickets lacking proper stamps and photos, with the birthplace listed absurdly as the Republic of Tuva, a central Russian region that is ethically very distinct from North Koreans. Also for Kursk, we see Russia's strategic shift into the region as the 34th Motorized Rifle Brigade has redeployed from Zaporizhia to Kursk, while the 104th Airborne Regiment of Russia has also made the move from Kherson to Kursk, with both groups making the treks in mid-November. This repositioning of forces highlights a significant realignment in military strategy, with both redeployments suggesting a focus on bolstering defense capabilities in Kursk amid Ukraine's incursion activities. Although, having said that, Russian forces have made a small modest gain in the past 24 hours, said to be somewhere southeast of Korenovo, so likely around the Novoivanovka front. But then on the other side of this axis, a reported column of Russian military personnel was destroyed just beyond Sudzha, although more specifically about 15 kilometers or about 9 miles from the settlement itself. Only the specific distance was mentioned, so it was likely, very likely to be at Ruskoye Pereknoye where these events unfolded. Then headed down into Ukraine, into the Kupiansk front, where Russian forces face an extremely difficult time up until this point in reaching the town head-on, leading them to continue cross-river engagements just beyond the northern Oskil River, which is some 12 kilometers north of Kupiansk itself. As such, their command has likely made this decision to send their forces in this western direction as a means to gain access to the main arterial leading south to Kupiansk. Though coming from this direction, it is a tough position from which to lodge a series of offensive operations from beyond the river, especially given that nothing else of particular value for the Russian army can be found for many tens of kilometers, if not more, beyond that point. Unless, of course, they're going south, as a means for creating a long-term encirclement tactic. And I do mean long-term, it wouldn't be quick by any stretch of the imagination. So at the moment, it still looks like Russia is continuing to attempt to solidify these positions, take the highway, control of it, then move south to Kupiansk, as what would be their primary goal in this region. Then further down on the map, and to another bizarre turn of events amongst the to and fro attack and counterattack operations in the Toretsk region, as Russian forces were spotted using unconventional modes of mobility once again, this time electric scooters, and all at the same time not realizing that they were being identified and followed by an AFU drone all the way to their hidey hole, literally, as found underneath destroyed and rubbled homes. Not long after, their location then took on fire from members of Ukraine's Azov Brigade not long after. It genuinely looks like they have to find another hidey hole now. And so, to be sure, though the invading forces have not run out of armoured personnel vehicles so far, it's quite fair to say that upon many metrics, they are, at this juncture, very heavily supply chain constrained, leading to this fallback e-scooter methodology, an incredibly inefficient setup, an inability to haul cargo, zero protection, small groups. Not to mention, it also helps to further ingrain the embarrassing title of the two-wheel army for Russia. Then briefly headed across west on the map as Ukrainian forces have made advancements at Kamyanska, located in the Zaporizhia region, successfully clearing Russian positions and reclaiming approximately 1.5 square kilometers along the M18 road. Of the event, reports confirmed a surprise attack by the 141st Mechanized Brigade, which caught Russian forces off guard, pushing back those forces on the eastern bank of the Kakhovka Reserve, and all reportedly done so, taking advantage of a somewhat failed troop rotation on the Russian side. While Russian military bloggers claim to have halted the Ukrainian advance and cut off supply lines, the momentum currently seems to favor Ukrainian operations in the region. Then, on the wider map, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico recently made a visit to Moscow, which had then sparked a wave of criticism, with the country's opposition leader labeling the trip a betrayal and a significant shift in Slovakia's foreign policy stance. The opposition argues that if Fico were genuinely concerned about gas transit issues, he should have engaged in discussions with Ukraine rather than aligning Slovakia with Russian interests. Then also on the much wider map, Georgian President Zurabishvili addressed a lively opposition rally, giving the ruling Georgian Dream Party a 6-day ultimatum to call new parliamentary elections, which were widely regarded as having been manipulated by Russian interference. Emphasizing her role, she declared, quote, "I will address from the palace tomorrow evening," and thereby reinforcing her position as both president and commander-in-chief. Meanwhile, protests in the capital continue to erupt, fueled by public dissatisfaction with recent government actions, as demonstrators gathered outside Parliament to voice concerns over proposed legislation that threatens press freedoms and civil liberties, all of which is legislation coming from the newly instated, and expected to be quite the Russian-linked group, the Georgian Dream Party. Then, also in the wider map, and in a very similar sentiment, in Belgrade of Serbia, approximately 30,000 protesters have taken to the streets to voice their discontent with President Vucic's government, particularly regarding corruption. However, unofficial estimates suggest the crowd may have swelled to around 100,000, indicating more widespread dissatisfaction among the populace. Now, while Vucic is often associated with his pro-Russian stance internationally, the protesters are primarily focused on domestic issues, calling for accountability and reform within his administration. And so, just like Georgia, the atmosphere in the capital is quite charged as citizens demand change, making their voices heard, all of which appears to be a broader understanding now of Russia's decline and its detrimental influence on other European nations. Then, to look even further out on the map, Russia is reported to be shifting military assets from Syria to bases in Mali and Libya, signaling a strategic pivot towards Africa, where approximately 1,200 Russian mercenaries are stationed. This redeployment coincides with heightened maritime activity, including the deployment of one of Russia's largest and newest landing ships, the Ivan Gren-class RFS, to assist in evacuation operations from Syria. The vessel was recently spotted in the Strait of Gibraltar, underscoring Moscow's readiness to support these types of operations. Then headed to some news, and looking at more innovative updates from Ukraine, as a new printed data transmission module has been introduced for frontline FPV drones, allowing for an efficient upgrade from standard radio antennas to fiber optic controllers. This solution snaps into place quickly, enabling operators to enhance their drone capabilities without the need for separate additional drone systems entirely. The modular approach taken in these designs helps the transition to fiber FPV operations, useful in particular shorter range use cases, especially where improved video feedback clarity is desired, but also where FPV units operate in an electronic warfare area of denial zone as well. So it's quite the innovative approach, quite the innovative add-on. Then to some more news, the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, has released its updated projections regarding the ongoing war in Ukraine, offering two scenarios that could shape the country's future. The baseline scenario anticipates an end to the conflict by late 2025, so next year, while a more pessimistic alternative scenario states that the war may drag on until mid-2026. The IMF's projections aim to guide international stakeholders in planning support strategies while highlighting the broader ripple effects on economic recovery and geopolitical stability. And so, based on these timelines that the IMF gave, I highly doubt that their most pessimistic scenario of mid-2026 is realistic, in the way that the war would be over long before then, at least in terms of where the current lines are drawn. And I say that for a few reasons. First of all, anything can happen, and when it does, it happens overnight. Secondly, this war has become way too expensive for Russia, and it's slowly but surely collapsing their economy. Not to mention the vantage point of the Russian citizens themselves, who are becoming increasingly agitated by this war, and how it's starting to affect their lives so significantly. And not just starting to affect their lives, but increasingly doing so for some time now. Then there's also the trump card. There's really a lot that could happen between now and that point in the future. Then to some final news to round it all off for today, guys. So in a recent statement, Hungarian Prime Minister and widely considered Russian lapdog Viktor Orban made statements on the evolving reality of the Eastern Front in Ukraine, advising that Russia is making gradual but steady advances. He expressed a stark view of the situation, declaring that the European Union has effectively lost the war. Orban's duty here is likely to set and enforce the Kremlin's narrative as much as he possibly can, especially coming into the New Year's White House administration, which is precisely just 4 weeks away to the day now. Another Kremlin talking point seen here that gives us further insight to the Kremlin's desires is how, long story short, it would appear that Putin wants to keep this conflict as small as possible, where Orban states that Europe should and would be best off to keep it as small as possible. And negotiations are a funny thing, so when we take a look at the wider country map that is Ukraine, it's really all about perspective, because at the start of Russia's invasion, even 6 to 12 months into their beloved SMO, Russia held significantly more land in Ukraine than it does now, meaning that Russia would still need to capture another 50,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian land, but that's only to get back to their highest point of gains in the invasion at the start of the war. And so, hypothetically, to achieve that, they would likely be significantly demilitarizing themselves in the process too. We wouldn't even see many e-scooters at that point, but rusty bicycles instead. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. I'm going to try to be around here and there at different points throughout the Christmas break as I live within the framework of all of these human things called commitments. And sure, a bit of much needed downtime with those in my life as well. So I wish you all a great holiday, spending time with friends and family. Also, if you happen to see some strange videos come up on my channel during the break, it's probably me testing live streams, sort of a slideshow of my now considerable collection of memes from times gone past, which is something I've wanted to do for a long time now. So fingers crossed I can squeeze that out on the sidelines of the holidays too. But for now, enjoy your break, if you get one. And either way, do have the merriest of Merry Christmases. So thanks again for watching, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers, guys.